That's okay. As I was saying, I've been a nurse for 25 years, and I absolutely have seen the changes in the care that nurses are able to provide at the bedside. I was explaining to Melody that I believe 99.9% of nurses actually want to do everything within their power to take care of the patients in a manner that will save lives. Unfortunately, over the past few years, I've noticed a decline in the amount of resources that nurses have had, whether it be equipment, supplies, and most importantly, the amount of nurses that are being staffed in the hospital at the bedside. And if anybody, I'm sure everybody is paying attention to what's going on with the pandemic and how critical nursing is right now. The hospitals have run so bare bones for the last few years that this test has ultimately shown what that has led us to. In Florida, I've noticed compared to working in other states that in Florida, there is no real accountability when it comes to mistakes being made at the bedside. And I don't want to say that nurses are not accountable. It's the fact that they're being sent to do a job without the proper resources. So it kind of puts us in a bind. Multiple nurses have tried to speak up, and when we do, we're often retaliated against and or fired. I've experienced this firsthand and have absolutely committed to not letting, I don't want to cry, I'm sorry, but I've committed to speaking up and doing the right thing, no matter where it leads, because ultimately it will be one of my family members or myself that's in the hospital. And I think that ties into a lot of your stories where mistakes were made. And I think that working together with your group can only benefit the community, because we have nurses that I believe want to do the right thing. And unfortunately, sometimes they just can't. And I'm not explaining every mistake away, because mistakes are absolutely made. With mistakes being the third leading cause of death, it's something that we have to address in a culture of learning from the mistakes instead of penalizing the mistakes. And I believe that nurses are afraid sometimes to speak up, because oftentimes we are the breadwinner, or we are single parents.
We lost part of your audio.
Can you hear me?
A little bit. It's like you moved away. Did you move away from the speaker at all?
No, not at all. Here.
Oh, that's better. That's better.
Is that better?
Yes.
Martha McNeil.
Join the meeting.
So I was just saying that right now we're in a culture that puts profits over any safety issues. And I think it's time that nurses work with the families in order to change the laws. I have noticed in Florida that because there is no law that will hold these hospitals accountable, we are often put in the position of doing things that otherwise would not be accepted. And I think more nurses out there support you and they want to advocate with you, but they're afraid. They're afraid of what may happen to them in their professional life. I've spoke to many nurses that would love the opportunity to speak in front of legislators, lawmakers, but they're often put in the position where it's speaking up for safety or losing their jobs. And with that, I just want to say that I'm personally sorry for taking so long to speak up about what's going on. And that's all.
I wish I could give you a big hug. For those that haven't had the opportunity to read it, I pasted Julie's story in the chat, and she whistle blew on a hospital where she was working because she could not see all of the patients' heart monitors and was unable to see them, and the stations were set up in such a way in an ICU where it was impossible for nurses to actually monitor the patients that were requiring this monitor, and they lost several patients because of it. And she spoke up about it and was fired for it. And we spoke the other night on the phone, and she was telling me how different healthcare experience is when you go to a hospital in another state. Which is something that I had not personally thought about. I've lived in Florida since I'm 11 years old, so, very interesting because here in Florida, they have the hospital corporations have a 50% or so chance of not, that you can't sue them if a wrongful death is committed. So, they have a little less worry about things like short staffing, which was also a challenge in Julie's case. And that's one of the things, actually, a couple of my friends who are nurses complain about all the time is short staffing, because that affects everything else. If you're trying to do the job of two people and you have lives of people in your hands, it just makes things a lot harder. And it's a battle cry that I've made several times, that falls deaf on legislators' ears, that because of free kill, there is less concern over hospital corporations' treatment for nurses. So the two issues definitely go hand in hand and affect one another. And I think Julie is very brave, and I really appreciate you for joining us and for being here and sharing with an open heart. you.
Of course, I met with Senator Harrell. She is the Senate Chair for Health Policy in the state of Florida. I've met with many representatives to talk about what's going on. I feel like it's shut down immediately because I believe that there's so much money being spent by the lobbyist that it's just a battle that's not wanting, they just don't want to bring up.
Yeah. So one of the things that
Right now I'm in Colorado.
one of the things we've been trying to do,
I'm sorry.
one of the things that we've been starting to do on this end, and I don't know if this will be helpful for you, but I reached out to Florida Right to Life. The Right to Life organization has a lot of lobbyists funding behind it. The Catholic community is very supportive of them financially, as well as other communities. And to date, we've had no problem getting Democratic representatives and senators on board for the cause, but we've had a lot of struggles getting the Republican um, legislators on board because they view this as an insurance and banking and policy issue, and they are not willing to budge on that. But it has been suggested to us that if we can get them to the conservative side to view this as a right to life issue, which it very much is, that they may change their tune because that is also a platform that funds them. So I spoke with Florida Right to Life. They asked me to draft a 1-page letter explaining why this is a right to life issue, how it's a right to life issue, which they could easily see, but it's something that had to be drafted to send to their leadership. And they might get behind it from a legislative perspective, and as they're separate, or as a separate organization, talk to legislators about this being a right to life issue. So we're hoping very much that that'll happen. I drafted the letter finally this week. I sent it over to Glenn. He is excellent at proofreading, and knows the cause so well. He'll know if I left anything out. So I sent it to Jordan as well, so that if there's anything that I shouldn't say, that he can filter that out as well. And we should have that off soon. So that's our next step. We do have enough Democratic legislators in the House of Representatives and in the Senate who would sponsor a bill. We do not have enough Republicans. We need one to co-sponsor a bill in the Senate that's a Republican. It has to be bipartisan or it just will not pass. That's the political climate. So and if we don't get one in the Senate, then there's no reason to ask our legislators in the House to put one forth, simply because it will not be heard unless there is a companion Senate bill. So that's where we're at today. I know several people have been making phone calls. I've yet to have receive the call that someone's going to sponsor it. I've made some phone calls myself as well. I had someone tell me they were very hopeful about new Senator Jennifer Bradley. They know someone on her staff. She's a Republican. I did meet with her, and she just said she would support it if it happened to come her way, but it's not something that she would have the appetite to co-sponsor. So that I haven't managed to score any other meetings with Republican senators as of yet, but there is a call list with with all of their contact information. And if anybody is interested in receiving that call list, just drop your email in the chat and I will make sure that you have access to that. The only thing we can do right now from where I sit for phone calls is to call the Republican Senate candidates because those are the ones we need to make the bill whole, to make a whole bill. There is legislation already drafted. They don't have to draft any legislation. It was submitted on the House floor, House Bill 6051 last year. And so that is the same language that we want. It's very simply a repeal of Section 8 that disallows the survivors to sue, to file suit in court. You know, so it's pretty simple legislation. It's not like some complicated piece that they have to, you know, try and write up. It's all done. And that is a part that can be a little bit prohibitive for them if they think it's like this big undertaking to do it. So does anybody have any questions or comments for Julie or for myself about what I've just shared?
Hey, Melody, it's Jordan.
Hey, Jordan.
Hey, Julie, I want to commend you for what you have done to stand up to the good old HCA boys, as I like to call them, over at West Side. I read the article. I shared it with members of my firm, who we are all very familiar with West Side as well as HCA. And it is very difficult for nurses who really do care for their patients and for making sure that their interests are looked out for to do their job in the climate of HCA hospitals or for-profit hospitals, however you want to couch it, as well as with the dynamic of working in between physicians and risk management and everything. So I do commend you for speaking out. It was very hard. I know, I'm sure it took a big toll on you and your family. But without people like you willing to voice for those who don't have one, this information doesn't get out. And I know for me personally, what I do in my practice, which is primarily medical malpractice, my job is to give a voice to those who don't have one. And so I really appreciate everything you've done and continue to do to speak out on that issue.
I will say that I know, thank you. It is a felony for elder abuse or neglect. And I'm not sure that Melody was talking about the Catholic and the Right to Life group, if that would help going at it from that angle also. But so often they're neglected. So many elderly patients are in Florida by themselves with no family. And they come to the hospital and it's a really unfortunate. It is a crime that this happens to them. And I just want to do everything I can to make sure what I signed up for 25 years ago when I became a nurse is what we're doing today.
Julie, are you
and I think most nurses feel the same way. I live in Florida, but right now I'm in Colorado for the pandemic. Even during a pandemic, these hospitals have the adequate supplies and the adequate nurses that they need, even during a
Are you
pandemic.
in Colorado?
Go ahead. Yes.
Are you
And that's
practicing
sad,
as a
knowing that yes. I'm a
sorry, there's a
registered
lag
nurse in the intensive care unit.
in
Can you hear
Florida?
me?
Yeah, there's a lag. There's a lag, so you gotta
In
kind of wait a
Colorado.
minute. Okay. Do you practice still in Florida at all when you live here?
I haven't since the pandemic. Well, that's not true. I did work in Miami during the pandemic down there.
Okay. I think, Julie, and I've been all over the country and worked with experts all over the country, and I've been to a lot of different hospitals up and down, and UCLA, New York, Cornell, Baylor. I think one of the biggest problems Florida has, besides their lack of oversight from an administrative perspective with ACA, as well as the internal oversight, is that there's not enough academic institutions in highly populated areas affiliated with a lot of the healthcare hospitals and communities. And when you have when you look at a lot of states, right, a lot of their healthcare, whether it's from the main hospital affiliated with a university or more rural, they all are part of that network, right? Whether it's Baylor Health, for example, or Pitt Health. And you see a different approach in medicine in the academic institutions because the sole purpose isn't generating profits for shareholders or a publicly traded company. And in Florida, a large percentage of hospitals and care is provided by for-profit public companies. That main goal is to increase profits and not really improve patient outcomes per se, and make sure people have appropriate care and safe care so that they can go on and live their lives and not come back. And I'm not saying it's a concerted effort,
Right.
necessarily in some instances, but when you look at how their interests are aligned, they make money when people come see them. So there's not a real incentive for them to improve and reduce the amount of, let's say, complications which require people to come back, because that's how they make
Right.
their money. And obviously
Right.
that's a larger discussion in the paradigm shift of healthcare, which, this country is going to be and has been slow to adopt like the rest of the modern countries. But, Florida, I've always said, is a wild, wild west. And it continues to be, not only because of that, because people like me, who are the only other people that can enforce when people don't comply with safe practice of medicine, we're so hindered by the laws that a lot of the times we can't do anything. And so there's really not an avenue to address these until, we start hacking away at what are just plainly fundamentally unfair laws in this state.
Agree.
Hi, this is Glenn. I'm a board member with Melody. And I just want to say thank you, Julie, for what you're doing. But, my experience really has not been faulting with any nurses, that's for sure. It's always been how the doctors have been negligent or having to follow the policies that have been set forth by the administration of the hospital. And so, ultimately, I think it goes higher, much higher up in terms of healthcare. But yeah, for-profit is certainly a problem when it comes to trying to administer the proper care that's needed. In terms of academic institutions aligning with hospitals, we've looked at policies, and also we've tried to figure out how the money gets from one to the other. And a lot of it has to do with the influence from outside, and trying to figure out where the foundation money is for a university and how it ties into hospital care is a black hole. So just because there's a university tied into a hospital doesn't necessarily mean there's less risk. Just want to make that point.
Thank you, Glenn. So unfortunately, the reasons for us all being here are, are rather negative, but I do appreciate that we're all coming together and doing some really good work to help make a difference. And it may be a while, but we just can't give up. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts or comments? I know this isn't the usual format that we have for our meetings.
I suppose I do have a question. So in my situation, and thank you, Julie, again, I didn't hear everything, but I thank you for speaking out as well. I guess I'm wondering at this point, considering like was mentioned, how things like that are a felony. Now, my dad was at an HCA hospital due for discharge that day. He was fine. And since then, ACA has investigated and found them at fault. It is on ACA's public website. My dad's care deficiencies are outlined, and the hospital has been sanctioned. So even with this law, how is there a way to approach it criminally versus civilly? I've been wondering that, because I almost feel like it's medical manslaughter. I don't really know the right terms, but is it criminal? Is there anything criminal that can be held against a person who does this?
It's a great question for Jordan.
So the basic answer is, are there criminal statutes that could apply? Sure. The practical answer is any prosecutor who makes $50,000 and has homicides, murders, and everything else under the sun to deal with going to spend their efforts trying to prove basically a medical negligence case? And the answer is no. The only time you ever see criminal charges brought is when it gets publicized enough and there's enough deaths tied into some type of issue that people get, right? So you saw with the hurricanes, they didn't have generators. They didn't have air conditioning. A lot of people died. Criminal charges can be brought. There's instances, for example, not in this state that I know of, but in Texas, of a surgeon who was so incompetent that he killed so many people on his operating table, it rose to the criminal, basically, level of criminal negligence, right? So the issue you have in 99% of cases is the deficiencies, right, or the violations in the standard of care from whichever providers are involved requires so much expert testimony and understanding of medicine and hospital practice to try to show what happened. And oftentimes you don't have records that are accurate. And for example, for me, it takes me, 3+ years on a med mal case, even when it's easy. And so, the issue you have is you're in an area of a professional practice that the structure of our laws are meant to be relegated more administratively and civilly, right? That's why we have civil laws, right? When you hit someone or you do something that's negligent, right? You don't act like a reasonably prudent person. The idea is you can sue them get a monetary award for your injuries, and then that stops the behavior. Because if you hurt them financially, then we say, okay, you're less likely to do this in the future. So criminal prosecutors, unfortunately, don't have the resources, manpower, and really knowledge to tackle these cases unless it rises to that such egregious nature that you kind of see in the news, which are far and in between, because there's a lot of people who are dying from pretty, I would say, reckless type negligence, that it's not really even questionable, that you can't even get a civil case on because of these laws. And, unfortunately, if you try to get a prosecutor, when you start getting a criminal level, you got to prove intent. And it's really hard for them based in reasonable doubt standard. Very hard for them to do that in those cases. And that's kind of just a practical reality of it all. And I know it's not a straightforward answer, but the best one I got.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Now, I have reached out to risk management regarding Amendment 7 and my right to see the amount of the medical errors and things and those type of things for certain dates that were between when when my dad went in for simply knee pain and when ACA found the hospital liable for what they did and how they could have prevented it, how they failed him. So I did request 60 days of records for that under the Amendment 7. Now, I have not heard back yet, but would that be grounds to start something that shows my dad isn't the only one, that there is other people that this is happening to, and that it could be a criminal type of case?
The problem is you're not going to have the same circumstances as your dad. And I don't know specifically what happened with your dad, but every patient's different, right? So every patient's going to have a different medical history. The reason they're in, the complications may not all be the same. Now, the errors might be one of the type of, I guess, what is the word I'm trying to use? More systematic, right, in nature, right? Maybe it's, these errors come up because there's a lack of staffing, right? Or there's a system in place that doesn't have specific specialists on call, where that would have changed. So, it really depends. But let's say it's all of that. None of that rises when you look at a criminal, right? Did they intend? Can you prove that they intentionally or with a reasonable degree or high certainty that they had these policies in place and people were going to die? It's a very high standard criminally.
Right.
And, you got to think about it. As a prosecutor who's got everything else to deal with, going to be able to deal with that. And, if you get one, let me know. But having talking to prosecutors and just understanding the system that we have, criminal prosecutors aren't meant to police medical doctors. The policing goes to the people who employ them, which unfortunately they don't do it, and the state. And you see what the state does. They write a nice little thing saying, oh yeah, you guys had some deficiencies. Here's a way to correct your deficiencies. Pay us $2,500. Okay.
Right.
These hospitals make tens of millions of dollars a week. It's much cheaper for them to pay fines every single day of every minute of the day than it is to pay in a lawsuit. Because they know if they get to a lawsuit and a jury with people like you, their, whole perspective, right, and the way they talk about it doesn't fly with jurors. It just doesn't. And the people they deal with within the hospital setting, they're professionals. Yeah, it's all kind of rub your back type stuff. I know, I've seen the peer review reports. Funny enough, even at Westside, I have a case with. and you see them efficiency, the doctor responds and says, well, no, that's not right. You know, look at this article or that, you know, I did everything okay. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we weren't really saying fix it, you know, just think about it.
Right.
So you don't ever get anything done. And that's the problem. You see the change, right? And Julie's kind of a prime example. You make enough hay or you create enough publicity and you can actually get a lawsuit in public court, they start changing their tune, because that's when it hits pocketbooks. You have a public jury, a civil case is public, it becomes public record, and you can't hide anymore. And even though some of the ACA stuff is public, no one knows where to look at that. 99% of the population doesn't know what ACA is and couldn't tell you how to look up a hospital complaint if they wanted to. But if you got a lawsuit, totally different story. And when you have a lawsuit in a medical negligence case where someone died, the damages is significant, right? Because that person lost his life, but the family lost a loved one. And those damages is what you go for. And that's usually millions, if not tens of millions, which is a lot more money than a couple $2,500 fines.
Right.
And you get hit with those every year, you know, then HCA starts reporting because they're public. You know, it's a whole business, right? You got to report lawsuits, you got to report the money and the risk. Well, when you got lawsuits of tens of millions and then it adds up across the country, you got hundreds of millions of liabilities now. Well, we can't have that. And then we start changing our behavior because we realize the system we have was financially beneficial, but it was causing errors, and those errors are now being, so what's cheaper? It's cheaper to get rid of the lawsuits. So let's change the behavior. But we don't have that checks and balance, and that's the problem.
Thank you.
Doesn't it, to be criminal, doesn't it also have to do with intent? I mean, aren't there are laws that protect healthcare workers from being labeled as criminals because they made an honest mistake, right? Isn't there something in there as well?
Hey, sorry, Melody, I was walking in my house. I lost you. What'd you say?
I asked if there are laws that protect healthcare workers from being labeled a criminal when they made an honest mistake, and that doesn't some of that criminality have to do with intent, real intent to harm, like, you know, like if that could be proven. For example, the case you brought up in Texas, he killed a lot of people in surgery, so he must have known at some point going back in that he was going to kill more people, and it becomes intent at some point.
Yeah. I mean, it's so the thing, you know, with him, an isolated doctor, right, who's killing people basically with a surgery technique, whatever you want to call it. Most of the deaths that happen in the hospital settings aren't due to an isolated surgery procedure gone wrong due to technical skill, if that makes sense. A lot of it is a lot of different things that happen, most of it not really medical based in nature. And what I mean by that is, you know, with this guy, you know, if you get like a documentary now and there's a lot of news articles about it, so you can read it up. I'm not as fresh on it, but so incompetent, and his death rate was so high. I mean, just ridiculously high. You know, the state medical board came in and it just rose to that almost just ridiculous, reckless disregard standard. Where so, no, you shouldn't be performing this, I should say, based on the way he was, you know, killing so many people. In hospital settings, you know, sure, do surgeries go wrong? Yes. Is it fault of the surgeon? Sometimes, sure. But a lot of the deaths occur post-operatively, right? Cases run in Spanish. Doctor doesn't want to come in. There's no specialist on call. You know, the nurse tries to report to the doctor the critical. It just requires you to come in and evaluate and
Jordan, we're not hearing you. We're not hearing you well.
Oh,
You're breaking up a lot.
sorry. My house is not conducive. Is this a little better?
Yes.
Okay. Not quite sure where you guys lost me, but where'd you guys lost me? Because I was kind of in a.
I'm not exactly sure. Well, it was breaking in and out. I think we were struggling for a few minutes. You know, I was personally struggling to catch it, and then you went out completely.
Well, I'll try to summarize briefly. What I was trying to say is with the physician in Texas, for example, it was very isolated to a singular surgeon whose death pretty much happened as a result of the technique and his incompetence as a surgeon, and such a high death rate that it couldn't be ignored. And it's akin to essentially, let's say, a 15-year-old kid performing spinal surgeries with no medical training. That's how bad he was. And it was clear, and no one did anything about it, and no one should have died, essentially, right? So that was such an egregious nature that people couldn't look away. The problem with most issues of medical negligence and death, especially in the hospital setting, it's not really from the procedure itself. It's not really from a singular, I'm in for a spinal surgery and I hit the spinal cord. Does it happen? Sure. And should those cases be prosecuted civilly? Sure. But a lot of the failures are more of a failure to identify, recognize complications, critical lab values, things that require you just to come in and assess a patient and provide the proper follow-up care, which doesn't take really medical training in the sense that you just got to come in and do your job. Most of the cases you see are exactly that. There's issues post-surgery, nurses reporting those issues, trying to get someone to come in. Doctor says, no, I'm not coming in. I'll be in the morning. He'll be fine. Give him this, give him that. But a nurse is only so good, she can only do so much. There's a certain level of training and assessment doctors got to do. And so a lot of the times the issues are just that. And there's a lot of different people in that process, depending on, the hospital and the surgery and the conditions involved. And so it's not really as easy to isolate, right, to one singular thing. But it's a systemic problem in the sense that the hospitals need to better understand that these are the issues and needs to hold these people accountable. They don't. But then the civil lawyers try to do that. And in the cases we can, we do. But in the cases where this law applies, we can't. And so criminally, again, it's extremely hard to do that when you got so many moving parts and you can't really form intent, because there's always going to be an excuse. And again, it's a battle of the experts. You're going to have doctors that say that's fine and doctors say it's not fine. And, in the legal world, that's what you have to kind of rely on as evidence. And so it's difficult. It's extremely difficult to get to that criminal standard.
That question does come up a lot. I think, people feel it's an emotional based reason. I mean, we feel that our loved ones were killed, right? So you want to do something about it. This isn't, about I want to sue because of money. It's about I want somebody to be held accountable for what happened to my loved one, and whatever that looks like is fine. And so that's why it comes up so often that people want to prosecute. The real way that we hold people accountable for things in this country is with money. That's just the truth. Our country is money driven, And if someone slipped and fell on my front porch because I didn't pressure wash and there was something slippery there, and if the postman comes up and slips and falls, he can hold me accountable for that. And how he does that is by suing me. That's how this country works, you know. Um, and that's something that could entirely happen if I kept those conditions at my home. But I have to be held accountable. But a doctor is not if it's a free kill, and that's where we have a problem here, right? Because you can hold the kid at McDonald's accountable for burning your hand with coffee. You can hold me accountable if you slip and fall in my driveway, but you can't hold a hospital or doctor responsible and accountable if your loved one was a free kill. So that's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy.
And what I tell legislators too, because they don't listen to basic arguments of fairness and human dignity, is, look, you don't like the public or the government paying for all this crap, right? Well, when you don't hold the culpable parties who are in the best position to pay for their harm, who do you think pays for it when they don't? The state does. Medicare, Medicaid, state programs are stuck with tremendous bills because you've designed a system that allows the culpable, financially rich hospital systems to continue to practice in the way that they do and never take responsibility for those who are really seriously injured, in most medical negligence cases, for their care. And so it goes right back to the state, who then picks up that bill, which can be tens of millions of dollars over the course of someone's lifetime.
Yeah, Julie and I were talking about that last night. In any other state, if your loved one died and was supported by Medicare or Medicaid, and they died wrongful death, and you took it to court and you won, the hospital would be required to pay back Medicare and Medicaid. But here, you can't even
Right.
take it to court, so Medicare and Medicaid don't get paid back for wrongful death in the state of Florida. That's a huge, huge financial problem. Um, and as well as the error continuing, right? And it gives the good nurses and the good doctors a bad rap, and creates a culture of fear. So if you had an experience where a nurse made a medical error, I mean, how many of you here, because you've had this experience, feel confident to go into a hospital and feel like you're going to get good quality health care and that nobody's going to accidentally kill you? Nobody, right? So we have all lost that confidence due to a healthcare worker
Not even me.
right? Exactly. So we've all lost that confidence. And those people that harmed our loved ones are still working and have not been re-educated, and they're contributing to the same problem. And it gives people like Julie and other good healthcare workers and excellent healthcare workers a bad rap too. A lot of impact happening here, right?
I just think there's so many things that come together that I think joining together and working together, both sides, with both interests, I just can't see how the legislators can keep ignoring the problem. I'm just at a loss of words. I just don't understand, because the more and more research I do, the information's out there, just like I came across your website. I mean, I don't understand what it takes for them to literally wake up and know that this could happen to their loved one. It could happen to them. I
hate to sound
can't wrap my brain around it.
what it takes is a few $1 billion campaign donations through lobbyists. That's
It's just,
The truth.
it's sad, but it's true. It's, I can't, and I hope to God that, what I'm doing, opens up a lot of conversations, that I hope what I'm doing is not in vain.
We hope so too.
Because I know I'm just one person, and they're huge, and I know that.
Well, you're welcome to join our meetings anytime. We meet every other Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the same this same link, the same Zoom room.
I would love it.
Definitely would appreciate your joining us, and we have a lot of regular attendees and some sporadic attendees, and so I think the core crowd kind of stays the same, and then people tend to shift in and out, but I'm sure you'll meet a lot of new people, and we're glad to have you working with us.
Thank you. I'm so happy that I met you guys. It just helps me know what I'm doing is right.
There's a lot of people out there fighting one way or the other, but I always say the only way bad people continue to do bad things if good people say nothing. So you gotta keep the voice up.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, before we do any closing of the meeting, I'm gonna give anyone final chance to say a few words if you have anything to add, because we do like to end promptly at 8, but if anybody else has anything to add, please do, and then we'll reconvene in 2 weeks.
I'll put 2 cents in here. I contacted Senator Debbie Mayfield and Tom Wright today, both of them. They were kind of cool on they'll look into it. I didn't get a whole lot of promise. I talked to their legislative assistants. Tom Wright's was a little more sympathetic to our case. Mayfield, she doesn't want to touch anything. They said she's the majority leader, so she doesn't want to initiate any bills or really stick her neck out too far this year, which is kind of unsettling if you're a leader. I thought that was interesting.
I've heard that if they're minority or majority leader, that they're actually not supposed to, which is also unsettling, but they're not supposed to initiate legislation because their role is more supportive of the rest of the legislators. But I mean, what does that do for the people that they represent? I don't know, but right. I have heard that before from other legislative assistants for other leaders. Politics is definitely different. It doesn't work like our regular lives.
Yeah, it's like if they're in a leadership role for a period of time, they don't want to do much because it's like they're going to stand out. So they're going to kind of fly under the radar. I thought, well, okay.
Yeah. I think too, all eyes are on them when they're in that role. Yeah. But thank you, Joseph. Appreciate that.
Sure, I'm going to keep right on that list.
This is my vet, and I want to say, I come in the middle, and I don't know exactly, but I will get in touch with you. She said she was hope what she's doing is not in vain. My thing is just sad that it seems like a lot of people, they don't care. So you call these senators and stuff like that, and they never have time and they don't care. But it seems like the only time that, other than you all, the only time that they care then it's just it happens to them. Then that then that care or concern, but they're not. It seems like they're not even concerned about what people go through. But then
Yeah,
they want to say, well,
it's a
why do you feel like you want to do suicidal or something like that? But they really don't care. I feel that way.
I'm sorry. But have you had a particular experience talking with a representative or a senator that made you feel that way?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Marvette, did you have a particular experience that made you feel that way?
No, I'm saying like like you said, when you got all the senators and the congressmen, they can't talk or they're busy or they're not interested in signing the bill, to sign have interest in even listening to what we have to say. But and then it's like it seems like people just other than y'all care. But if it doesn't touch you, if it didn't hit you, like especially if y'all wasn't everybody on this phone has been through something like this, right? Other than the nurse, I guess she experienced a lot of it because she see it. But I have experienced stuff in my life that was medical negligence. And so have pretty much everybody else on this phone here have other. I think because a lawyer just on the phone also. I'm not sure if he experienced it, but he cares. It just seems like out of all the people and all the websites and stuff that you have and everything that's going on, why is only 8 people or 10 people that comes to the meeting? I guess that they feel like there's no use for this like a losing battle because nobody cares unless it hits their home or unless it hits them personally. But do you feel that way sometimes?
I try to stay positive. I can understand how you feel that way sometimes. I definitely feel that way when I get the situations like Joseph mentioned, where they kind of brush you off or use words like there's not much of an appetite for that. Like, what do you mean there's no appetite for it? Like, it's a serious thing. So I can understand how you get down. But, I say it's more important to try and focus on the ones that do care and just not give too much attention to the ones that don't, because, the ones that do care are the ones that matter. They're maybe a little harder to find, kind of like digging for gold, And I think I've been at this 4 years with Glenn and Mary and Jordan. I think hooked up with all of them, close to 3 years ago. Is it 3 years? Yeah. And it's definitely not something that can be changed overnight. And then, they just did an election and some of the people that had been on board with helping us change this were voted out. Right. So, then it's kind of like starting from scratch in those areas and building on what's left. So, this kind of gives us a few more years to try and get it through before the next batch of people comes in. And I think a large amount of these legislators honestly do not understand and do not know about this law until we talk to them. I think they have no idea.
I wanted to say that to Marvell. I wanted to tell Marvell that I've met with numerous legislators and I've always referred to this law. And a lot of them were not aware of how this works. So it's also educating them, because if you put them in the situation, maybe they can have a heart and at least try to understand. I'm not saying that everyone's going to jump right on it, but a lot of them just don't know how it works. That all they know is politics. They don't understand the whole realm of what this law does.
Right, but you say you put them in the position to say, how would you feel if it happened to you?
You know what?
But then you tell them that they don't do anything.
You know what I do, Marvette, when I get one of the legislative aides on the phone is I usually ask them, hey, do you mind me asking you a personal question? It seems personal, but it's really related. And they say, okay. I say, are you married? And most of the time they're college kids on internships. And, let's say 90% of the time they say, no, I'm not married. I say, do you have kids? And they say, no, I don't have kids. I say, well, then this law applies to you. If your loved one, if you passed away in a hospital because somebody, God forbid, cut an artery and killed you, do you think your parents or your siblings would want to go after the hospital and hold accountable and responsible the person who slit that artery? And they say, oh yeah, they absolutely would. And I say, no, they wouldn't. And this is why. So I like to relate it to them instead of telling my personal story out the gate. And if they say, no, I am married or whatever, say, oh, do you have any unwed family members? Oh yeah, my sister. Chances are pretty high you could find someone, some way to relate it to them. And when they think of it in the perspective of, oh my gosh, my mom is a free kill. If somebody accidentally kills my mom, I would absolutely want to go after them and make sure that they were held accountable. I think
that they would be held accountable for what they do. They wouldn't let it happen so often. Now they know a few, because when you go in there, they know your history as how many kids you got, how old it is, you have a spouse. And if you don't, they just like, you're not there, and they just go to the next patient. So if something happens to you, they know it's nothing to be done.
Yeah.
And I spoke to him, that I understood him earlier, that's kind of is like, I feel that's criminal, because you know that if you don't do anything, there's nothing going to happen. So you do it. So I don't understand why you can't make that criminal, because you're refusing to get medical care that you're supposed to be giving everyone that comes to the hospital. That's what they come there for. That's what you went to school for, to save lives, not take lives. It's not supposed to be in your hand to take anyone's life. You're supposed to try to save a life, and you can't. You did everything you could, then you should feel good. How you go home to sleep at night and know this is going on? I'm talking about the doctors. How do they go home and sleep at night and know what they're doing? I guess the money suffices their feelings.
Yeah, I hear you. I wish I had a better answer. Thank you for sharing, Marvette. I really appreciate you. So I'm going to close the meeting until next time. And please keep calling the legislators. Feel free to reach out to me if you need the list or have any questions. If you have any questions that are legal in nature, I will connect you with Jordan. And Glenn, when you have a chance, will you please check your email and look at that letter? Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. It was nice meeting
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.